The day my husband left for his business trip, I never imagined he'd be spending it on a honeymoon, just not ours. I remember the way the suitcase looked sitting by the front door, perfectly packed, the zipper straining just a little at the corners. My husband, Greg, was always meticulous about his packing, shirts rolled, socks tucked into shoes, every item in its place. He said it was a habit he picked up from his father, a man who'd spent half his life on the road for work. I used to find it endearing, a sign of his reliability. Now, looking back, I wonder if it was just another way to keep his secrets neat and tidy. It was a Thursday morning in early spring, the kind of day when the air still held a chill, but the sun was bright enough to make you believe warmer days were coming. I stood in the kitchen, pouring Greg's coffee into his favorite travel mug, the one with the faded logo from his alma mater. He came in, freshly shaved, his hair still damp from the shower, and kissed me on the cheek. "Don't forget to water the ferns," he said, smiling as he reached for his mug. "And tell Mrs. Carter I'll be back in time for her birthday." I smiled, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. "I'll take care of everything. You just focus on your conference." He grinned, that easy, boyish smile that had charmed me from the very first date. "I'll call you tonight, okay?" I nodded, watching as he grabbed his suitcase and headed out the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, the quiet settling over the house like a blanket. Our neighbor, Lisa, was out in her yard, fussing with the rose bushes she'd planted last fall. She waved as Greg drove by, her new husband, Matt, standing beside her, holding a bag of mulch. They'd just gotten married 2 weeks earlier, a small ceremony in her parents' backyard, the whole neighborhood invited. I'd baked a cake for the reception, watched as Lisa and Matt danced under the string lights, their faces glowing with happiness. I envied them just a little. Greg and I had been married for 12 years, and while we still loved each other, the spark had faded. Life had become a series of routines: work, bills, dinners in front of the TV, the occasional date night when we could both manage to stay awake past 9. I told myself it was normal, that all marriages settled into comfort eventually. But as I watched Lisa and Matt laughing together in their yard, I felt a pang of longing for something I couldn't quite name. That day, I went about my usual routine. I worked from home, answering emails and making phone calls, the house quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher and the occasional bark from our dog, Max. I watered the ferns, as Greg had asked, and checked in on Mrs. Carter, our elderly neighbor, who insisted on living alone despite her failing eyesight. In the afternoon, I took Max for a walk around the block. Lisa was out front, waving as I passed. "Hey, Sarah, how Greg? Off to another conference?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, he'll be gone until Sunday. How's married life treating you?" She laughed, her cheeks flushing. "It's wonderful. We're actually leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow, finally. Matt's been swamped at work, so we had to postpone. But we're heading to the coast for a long weekend." I smiled, genuinely happy for her. "You two deserve it. Have a great time." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of unease settle in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, just the usual worry that came when Greg was away. I'd always hated sleeping alone, the house too quiet, every creak and groan amplified in the darkness. That night, Greg called as promised. His voice was warm, familiar, but there was a distance to it I couldn't quite place. "Long day," he said, yawning. "The flight was delayed and the hotel lost my reservation, but I'm settled now." I asked about the conference, about his colleagues, about the city. He answered every question, his responses just detailed enough to sound real. I told him I missed him, that Max kept looking for him at the door. "I'll be home before you know it," he promised. "Love you, Sarah." "Love you too," I replied, hanging up and staring at the phone for a long time. The next day, I kept busy: work, errands, a quick visit to my sister's house across town. I tried not to think about Greg, about the way his voice had sounded on the phone, about the strange feeling that something wasn't right. That evening, as I was taking out the trash, I noticed Lisa's car was gone. Matt's truck, too. I smiled, picturing them driving down the highway, windows down, music blaring, the start of their new life together. I went back inside, made myself a cup of tea, and settled in with a book. But I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting to Greg, to the way he'd kissed me goodbye, to the way he'd smiled at Lisa as he drove away. I told myself I was being silly, that I was just lonely, that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew something was about to change. Don't go anywhere, because what I discovered next would unravel everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my neighbor, and the secrets we keep. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the sound of Max's paws tapping on the hardwood floor. I stretched, feeling the emptiness of the bed beside me, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. I made coffee, fed Max, and sat at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone. There was a text from Greg. "Busy day ahead. I'll call you tonight. Love you." I smiled, but something about the message felt off. Greg always sent a photo when he traveled, a picture of his hotel room, his breakfast, the view from his window. This time, there was nothing. I told myself not to read into it. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he'd forgotten. I decided to keep busy. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, vacuuming under the furniture, scrubbing the bathroom tiles, even organizing the junk drawer in the kitchen. I called Mrs. Carter to check in, and she invited me over for tea. I spent an hour listening to her stories about her late husband, her eyes shining with memories. When I got home, I noticed something strange. Lisa's mail was piling up in her mailbox. I frowned, remembering her saying they'd be gone for the weekend, but it was only Friday. Maybe they'd left early. I shrugged it off and went back inside, determined not to let my imagination run wild. That evening, Greg called as promised. His voice was warm, but there was a background noise I couldn't quite place. Waves, maybe, or the distant call of seagulls. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He hesitated. "Just stepped outside for some air. The hotel's right by the water." I smiled, picturing him standing on a balcony overlooking the ocean. "Sounds nice. Send me a picture." He laughed, a little too quickly. "Sure, I will, just as soon as I get back to my room." We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted and awkward. When we hung up, I stared at my phone, waiting for the photo that never came. The next day, I took Max for a walk around the neighborhood. As we passed Lisa's house, I noticed her garden hose was still coiled neatly by the porch, the flowers in her window boxes drooping from lack of water. I made a mental note to water them for her, just as she'd done for me when Greg and I went on vacation last summer. I bent down to pick up her mail, planning to bring it inside, when I noticed something odd, a postcard, addressed to Lisa and Matt, with a picture of a beach I recognized from the travel brochures Lisa had shown me. The postmark was from the same city Greg had said he was visiting for his conference. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned the postcard over, reading the message scrawled in Lisa's familiar handwriting. "Having the best time. The weather is perfect and the hotel is even better than the pictures. Wish you were here. L." I stared at the postcard, my mind racing. Greg had said his hotel was by the water. Lisa had said she and Matt were going to the coast. Could it be a coincidence? I tried to shake off the suspicion, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. That night, Greg didn't call. I waited, staring at my phone, willing it to ring. When it finally buzzed, it was a text. "Sorry, late night. Talk tomorrow. Love you." No photo, no details, just words on a screen. I lay awake for hours, my mind spinning with questions. Was Greg really at a conference? Was Lisa really on her honeymoon? Or was something else going on, something I couldn't quite bring myself to name? The next morning, I decided to water Lisa's flowers. As I stepped onto her porch, I noticed a slip of paper tucked under the doormat, a receipt from a seafood restaurant in the same city Greg had traveled to. The date matched the day Greg had left. I picked up the receipt, my hands shaking. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, a dessert for 2. The signature at the bottom was Matt's. I stood there, the receipt fluttering in the breeze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Don't go anywhere," because what I discovered next would unravel every lie, every secret, and every promise I thought my marriage was built on. I stood on Lisa's porch, the receipt trembling in my hand, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. I tried to tell myself it was all a coincidence. Maybe Greg and Matt had run into each other by chance. Maybe they'd had dinner together while Lisa was in the hotel room. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. I went back home, the world suddenly too bright, too loud. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the receipt, the postcard, and my phone. I scrolled through Greg's messages, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. There was nothing, just the same short, vague texts, the same empty promises to call. I tried to distract myself with chores, but every sound made me jump. I kept glancing at the clock, counting the hours until Greg was supposed to come home. I wanted to call Lisa, to ask her if everything was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What would I even say? "Are you on your honeymoon with my husband?" That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattling the windows. Max curled up beside me, his warm body a small comfort in the empty house. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Greg's car in the driveway. I sat up, my heart pounding as he came through the door, suitcase in hand. He looked tired, but there was a lightness to his step I hadn't seen in months. "Hey, honey," he called, setting his bag down. "I'm home." I forced a smile, my hands clenched at my sides. "How was the conference?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Long, boring, glad to be home." I watched as he unpacked, his movements too casual, too rehearsed. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but I bit my tongue. I needed proof, real proof, before I confronted him. Later that day, I saw Lisa's car pull into her driveway. She got out, sunglasses perched on her head, a wide smile on her face. Matt followed, carrying their bags, his arm around her waist. They looked happy, relaxed, the picture of newlywed bliss. I watched from my window, my heart aching. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was just jealous of their happiness, that Greg would never betray me like that. But then I saw it, a small detail that made my blood run cold. Greg's favorite blue baseball cap, the one he always wore on vacation, was tucked into the side pocket of Matt's suitcase. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. There was no way that was a coincidence. That evening, I waited until Greg was in the shower. I slipped into his office, searching through his bag, his pockets, his wallet. I found a hotel key card, a brochure for the same resort Lisa had mentioned, and a receipt for a couple's massage, signed by Lisa. My hands shook as I pieced it all together. Greg hadn't been at a conference. He'd been at the beach, at the same hotel as Lisa and Matt, sharing their honeymoon. I felt sick, the room spinning around me. I sat on the floor, clutching the receipts, the key card, the brochure, the truth finally too heavy to ignore. When Greg came out of the shower, I was waiting for him in the living room. I laid the evidence on the coffee table, my eyes locked on his. "Do you want to tell me where you really were?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stared at the items, his face draining of color. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sat down, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered. "I never meant for you to find out like this." I felt tears sting my eyes. "How long?" He looked away. "A few months. It started before the wedding. Lisa and we didn't plan it. It just happened." I shook my head, anger and heartbreak warring inside me. "You spent her honeymoon with her, while her husband was there." He nodded, shame etched into every line of his face. "Matt doesn't know. We snuck around, made excuses. I told you I was at a conference. I'm so sorry." I stood, my hands shaking. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. How could you?" He reached for me, but I pulled away. "Don't, just don't." I left the room, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. I replayed every moment of the past few months, every late-night phone call, every business trip, every time Greg had smiled at Lisa across the fence. I wondered how I could have missed it, how I could have been so blind. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Greg moving around the kitchen. I stayed on the couch, listening as he made coffee, the clink of the spoon against the mug painfully normal. When he finally came into the living room, he looked like he hadn't slept either. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse, "I know you probably hate me. I don't blame you. I never wanted to hurt you." I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "But you did. You hurt me and you hurt Matt. And Lisa, what about her? What about your vows? What about everything we built together?" He sat on the edge of the coffee table, his head in his hands. "I don't have any excuses. I was selfish. I got caught up in something I couldn't control." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You could have controlled it. You could have told me the truth. You could have ended it before it started." He looked up, his eyes red. "I know, I'm sorry." I stood, my legs unsteady. "I need you to leave, Greg. I need space. I can't even look at you right now." He nodded, standing slowly. "I'll go stay at a hotel. I'll give you time." He packed a bag and left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. The house felt emptier than ever. I wandered from room to room, touching the things we'd collected over the years. Photos from vacations, souvenirs from anniversaries, the quilt my grandmother had made for our wedding. Everything felt tainted, touched by betrayal. I called Carla, my voice breaking as I told her what had happened. She listened, her anger fierce on my behalf. "You didn't deserve this, Sarah. None of it. But you're stronger than you think. You'll get through this." I wanted to believe her, but all I felt was loss. Later that day, I saw Lisa in her yard, watering her roses. She looked up as I approached, her smile faltering when she saw my face. "Sarah, hey." I held up my hand, stopping her. "Don't. I know everything. I know about you and Greg. I know you spent your honeymoon with him." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to happen. I love Matt, I do, but Greg, it just happened." I shook my head, my own tears falling. "You lied to me. You lied to Matt. You lied to everyone." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "I can't do this, Lisa. I can't be your friend. Not now." I turned and walked away, the weight of her betrayal settling over me like a shroud. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the rooftops. Max curled up at my feet, his head resting on my lap. I thought about all the things I'd lost, my marriage, my friendship, my sense of safety in my own home. But as the sky darkened, I realized I still had myself. I still had the strength to face the truth, to pick up the pieces, to start over. The days that followed were a blur. I went to work, came home, ate dinner alone. I avoided calls from my parents, from friends who'd heard the news. I couldn't bear the pity, the questions, the endless retelling of my pain. But through it all, I held on to one thing, the knowledge that I deserved better, that I was worth more than lies and secrets, that I could survive, even when everything I thought I knew had been shattered. Autumn arrived, and with it, a sense of quiet healing. The leaves outside my window turned gold and red, and the air grew crisp. I found comfort in small routines, walking Max every morning, baking bread on Sundays, tending to the garden that Greg had always promised to help with but never did. The house was still, but it was mine again. Every day I reclaimed a little more of myself. Greg called a few times, his voice hesitant, asking if we could talk. I told him I needed time. He apologized over and over, but I could hear the distance in his words. He'd made his choices, and now he had to live with them. Lisa and Matt moved away before the first snow. I heard from a neighbor that Matt had found out the truth. He'd seen a message on Lisa's phone, and the confrontation that followed was loud enough for half the block to hear. I never saw Lisa again. I hope, in some small way, she finds peace. I hope Matt does too. I started seeing a counselor, working through the grief and anger that threatened to swallow me whole. I learned to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too easily, for loving too much. I learned that healing isn't a straight line, that some days are harder than others, but that every day is a chance to begin again. Carla came over every Friday night, bringing takeout and stories from her week. We laughed, sometimes through tears, and I realized that friendship, real friendship, can survive even the worst storms. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch with Max, I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I was stronger than I'd ever been. I was braver, kinder, more willing to trust myself. I knew, deep down, that I would be okay. The first winter after Greg left was the hardest. The days grew short and gray, and the house felt colder than ever. I kept the curtains open, hoping the weak sunlight would warm the rooms, but most days I found myself wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the bare trees, wondering how I'd ended up here. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway and Max's quiet sighs as he lay at my feet. But slowly, almost without realizing it, I began to fill the emptiness with new routines. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter on Saturday mornings, walking dogs and cleaning kennels. The work was messy and loud, but it gave me a sense of purpose. The other volunteers welcomed me with easy smiles and gentle questions, never prying, just letting me be part of something again. I reconnected with my sister, Emily, who lived 2 towns over. We hadn't been close in years, life and distance and old arguments had gotten in the way. But when she heard what happened, she called, her voice trembling with worry. "Come visit," she said. "Let's start over." I spent a weekend at her house, helping her bake cookies with her kids, laughing until my sides hurt. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I also started writing again. I'd always loved to journal, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped. Now, every night before bed, I poured my thoughts onto the page, the anger, the grief, the small victories. I wrote about the first time I made it through a whole day without crying, about the neighbor who brought me soup, about the way Max would nudge my hand when I was feeling low. I wrote about the dreams I'd let go of, and the new ones I was just beginning to imagine. One day, I found an old box of photos in the attic, pictures from my childhood, from college, from the early days of my marriage. I sat on the floor, sifting through the memories, letting myself feel the sadness and the joy. There was a photo of Greg and me on our honeymoon, standing on a windswept beach, our arms around each other, our faces full of hope. I let myself grieve for that girl, for the life she thought she'd have. But I also found a photo of myself, alone on a hiking trail, grinning at the camera, strong and unafraid. I pinned that one to the fridge, a reminder that I was still that woman, even after everything. As the months passed, I started to notice small changes. I slept better, I laughed more. I found myself looking forward to things again, a new book, a walk in the park, a cup of coffee with Carla. I painted the living room a bright, cheerful yellow, letting the color chase away the shadows. I rearranged the furniture, bought new curtains, planted daffodils in the garden. Each change was a small act of hope, a way of saying, I'm still here, I'm still living. One afternoon, I ran into Matt at the grocery store. He looked tired, older, but there was a kindness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. We talked for a few minutes, about the weather, about the neighborhood, about the way life can surprise you. He told me he was moving to a new city, starting over. "It's not easy," he said, "but I think it's time." I wished him well, and as I walked away, I realized I truly meant it. I also started to let go of the anger I felt toward Lisa. It wasn't easy. Some days, the hurt flared up, sharp and fresh. But I reminded myself that holding on to bitterness would only keep me stuck. I wrote her a letter I never sent, pouring out everything I wanted to say. The pain, the betrayal, the hope that she would find her own healing. When I finished, I tucked the letter into my journal and let it be. Spring came, and with it, a sense of renewal. The daffodils bloomed in the garden, bright and stubborn, pushing through the last of the frost. I opened the windows, letting in the fresh air, and felt something inside me shift. I was still grieving, still healing, but I was also growing. I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that I deserved happiness, that I could build a new life from the pieces of the old one. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Max, watching the sun set over the rooftops, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I thought about everything I'd been through, the lies, the heartbreak, the loneliness, and realized that I was still standing. I was still here, and I was ready for whatever came next. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who break us. Sometimes the life we build with someone turns out to be made of secrets and lies. But even in the ruins, there is hope. There is a chance to start over, to find yourself again, to choose honesty and healing over bitterness and regret. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, or if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, I hope you know you're not alone. Healing takes time and it takes courage, but you are stronger than you think. Would you have confronted your husband or tried to forgive? Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Thank you for listening and for being part of this family. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, even after the deepest betrayal, you can still choose to begin again.